Ademola. Good afternoon. Thank you for taking out time to speak to us. We would like to know your views of today. You were speaking at a panel, a plenary session 2. Can you share more about that?
Thank you for having me. I think it's been an interesting conference. I've listened to 2 different conversations, panel sessions, and I've been part of one, making a third. And I think the conversations being had are very critical to how we advance energy access, energy security in Africa. Particularly, when you look at the content of the conversations being had, learning how many other organizations and entities are doing what we are doing, for example, in Oando Clean Energy, and even the larger Oando group as a whole, trying to advance energy security and energy access on the African continent. Being in the room to participate in those conversations, I believe, is extremely important. Being able to influence the conversation as well, the message, is also important. So for me, I'd say A, for relevance, and more importantly, when you look at what we were discussing around financing, I think that we need to pay a lot of attention in Africa to the fact that there's a new capitalist system that's evolving, and that's a clean energy system. And if we focus too much on delivering infrastructure for energy generation or power generation, like we've heard different cases being made for more investments to go into PV infrastructure because of course, the solar resource that we have, which is not a faulty argument to make. My concern really is we're not paying attention to the fact that it's a capitalist system that's evolving, and if we focus on generation more than we do on manufacturing, then we lose out again. We remain on the back foot on the energy journey. What am I saying? It's important that we build PV infrastructure, for example, but it's even more important that we build manufacturing capacity for solar panels on the continent. It's even more important that we build battery manufacturing capacity on the continent. We have all the resources required to do these 2, just to put it in context. So yes, let's adopt electric vehicles for transportation to decarbonize transportation on the continent. Let's build solar PV infrastructure to decarbonize power consumption, as well as increase access to power. But let's not do so at a disadvantage. Because if we don't build manufacturing capacity locally, what happens is whether we raise the capital for such infrastructure projects on the continent or from outside the continent, we will send about 90% of all of that money out to China to import solar panels and batteries and other stuff. We don't retain the value that is required to grow the ecosystem. And that we must be mindful of, right? So that said, I think we can do better with the structure of the conversations. I think there were far too many panelists per panel, taking away from the ability of the audience to fully participate and make these sessions as engaging as you need them to be, so that you take thoughts and opinions from the room. There are certain conversations that are best suited for fireside chats or syndicate rooms, and it can be better structured. But I consider these to be like teething problems, right? I think this is the 2nd edition of the conference. So, but I think I'll do it again, but we need to see it restructured so it's more engaging, more meaningful, and we don't lose the audience. All right, so more audience participation, if we can just restructure the sessions, I think will be very valuable.
Okay. Thank you very much for sharing that. During your session, you mentioned we taking accountability as Africans and trying to drive the investments, the financing structures, as you mentioned again. What would you say Oando Clean Energy is doing differently in Nigeria?
Well, I mean, to start with, for the Oando Group to set up Oando Clean Energy as a wholly owned subsidiary, that's us taking accountability. And what we have done is not just to set up a business and say, let's see what goes. No, we have a company that has designed different projects across multiple renewable energy verticals, in wind, in solar, in gas and biofuels, in sustainable transportation, in waste for value, in carbon trading and nature-based solutions across multiple verticals, right? And what we've done, in essence, is we've looked at the net zero agenda of the country, set for 2060. We've looked at the highest contributors of GHG emissions across the continent and the country, Nigeria. We've identified the ones that contribute the highest. And we recognize that if we design and deliver projects that will reduce emissions in these different verticals, what you find is you're joining essentially the government to leapfrog or take giant strides towards the achievements of net zero. And we actually capped it. So when we looked at the contributions that each one of our projects will make, we decided to take a commitment that Oando Clean Energy Limited as an entity will reduce GHG emissions in Nigeria by 3.8%. That is a call to action that we're giving to all other private players in the country and extended across the continent to say, imagine if all other organizations in Nigeria made a commitment to reducing GHG emissions by, say, 2%, 1.5%, 1.2%, 5%. By the time you aggregate those commitments from 100 companies alone, then you have actually moved the country to achieving its net zero agenda, right, by 2060. So, and interestingly, it wasn't something that we did sitting with the government to articulate, right? We just basically did our strategy, looked at the environment, and decided that this is how, we should play. And by the time the federal government released the Energy Transition Plan, it was as if we actually synced our thoughts, right? So what we're doing is we're not working in a vacuum as a private organization. We're actually working within the larger context of the agenda to reduce carbon emissions on the continent.
Okay. It's great to hear the goal of Oando Clean Energy to reduce gas emissions. Would you like to share on some of the measures that you guys are taking to actually do some sort of scale and measure the reduction or the
So I'll give you an example, because I know we're pressed for time. So one of the verticals is sustainable transport. So we partnered with Lagos State Government through the Lagos Metropolitan Area Transport Authority. And these authority, they're the agency responsible for managing public transport in Lagos State. Because Lagos is a highly logistics-based economy, that is, a lot of people move around, a lot of goods move around. Transportation contributes a significant portion of GHG emissions in Lagos State and Nigeria as a whole. So we thought, why don't we take transportation, introduce electric vehicles for mass transportation on one hand and taxi hailing services on the other. So we invested in this, right? And we've brought in buses to test the technology. We have 24 months worth of data that says that this is a viable path to follow. We just need to tweak a few things on the commercial side. But on operations resilience, the buses are great. On technological adaptability, the buses are great. Environmental acceptance, the buses are great. And we see the value that they bring and how they mitigate the use of diesel. And we know how much diesel we have prevented and how many mature trees would have been required to sequester the carbon that the diesel would have, released if they were burnt or if it was burnt. So bottom line is, what we're doing now is we're moving from test phase to expansion. So by this time, okay, maybe by November 2027, we will have 552 electric high-capacity buses in Lagos. And when you look at the impact that those buses will make over a 10-year period, for example, then you see the significance of what we're talking about. And that's for municipal transportation. When we then move to biofuels and perhaps hydrogen, then we speak about long-haul transportation for more of goods transportation and all of that. So that's essentially an example of some of the things we're doing. I mean, on the wind energy side, for example, you would hear historically that wind profile in Nigeria is not great. And yes, that's true, because the study that gave out the data that led to that conclusion was conducted at about 40 meters above sea level. We have done further research, and we have found that from 80 meters above sea level and up, right, the wind profile in Nigeria is actually well above like 3 terawatt, right, of power. And so what we've done now is we've published the very first wind resource report for Nigeria, looking at every single state and identifying the locations where the wind profile is high, so that investors can look at this and then make a decision as to how they want to progress investment should they choose to do that within the wind energy space. So again, providing data to help galvanize or pull the trigger on investment in the wind energy space. So it's just one of the different things that we're working on. And yes, we're looking to build a 1.2 gigawatt solar modular assembly plant. We're building a PET bottle recycling plant, and and then we're using end-of-life wells to generate geothermal energy so that we can decarbonize oil and gas operations in the Niger Delta and clean up our activities as the Oando JV in the Niger Delta as we expand, the de-escalation of these carbon emissions footprints, across the country.
Okay, my last question for you will be in 2 parts. Where can we access the report? And finally, you said you would like to do this again. Was there a possibility for collaboration between the AETC Center and the Oando Clean Energy Day?
Absolutely, there's a possibility for collaboration. That's there. And on the report, I just need to present it to the Minister of Power officially.
Yes.
And once that ceremony is done, the world can have access to the report.
Okay.
And that's set for next month.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for providing such insightful thoughts and the data, and to show us exactly what Oando Clean Energy is doing. We're really grateful to have you here, and we wish you a great time at the conference.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure.